Have you ever felt like your life is spiraling out of control? As if the world around you is pushing you into a corner and you have no choice but to fight back? Well, today I'm going to share a story that might just change the way you think about the world around you. It starts in a neighborhood that most would call a peaceful paradise, a place where everyone dreams of a simple, happy life. But behind that serene facade lies a fierce battle, a battle that not only changed the course of one man's life, but also tore apart a seemingly perfect community. Imagine this. You live in a place where you thought you'd found peace, tranquil streets, friendly neighbors, and shared community spaces. But one day, someone takes advantage of that trust and starts pushing boundaries in ways you never expected. A small decision, something that seems harmless at first, snowballs into a full-blown crisis. And soon, you realize that standing up for what's right might be the only thing left to do. This isn't just a story about a fight for property or land. It's a story about standing up for yourself, for your family, and for your rights. It's about realizing that sometimes, when everything feels like it's falling apart, the only thing you can do is take a stand. But here's the question. When everything around you is stacked against you, will you bow down or rise up and take control of your future? What would you do if everything you've worked for is at risk? In this video, we'll uncover the incredible twists and turns of a battle for justice, where the stakes are higher than you can imagine. And trust me, by the end, you'll be left wondering, what would I have done in this situation? To fully understand the battle that unfolded, we need to rewind a few months, back when I still believed life at Willow Creek Estates would be the peaceful paradise it was advertised as. Everything began with what seemed like an innocent decision, or at least that's what I thought. When my family and I moved here, this neighborhood was sold to us as a utopia, a place where everyone lived in harmony, with shared access to a community lake and common areas. But everything began to change the moment Karen Fitzgerald became the president of the HOA, the Homeowners Association. Karen, a strong-willed and decisive woman, began using her newfound power to enforce increasingly strict rules, which not only made my life harder, but also tore the community apart. The first sign something was off came when Karen started making seemingly small changes to the community's rules. It all started with minor things, like the regulation on tree planting or the requirement to get approval from the HOA for almost anything. At first, it seemed harmless, but the more I looked into it, the more I realized these changes were designed to consolidate her power, making the community less about cooperation and more about control. Then Margaret, Karen's cousin, appeared on the scene. At first, she was just another new neighbor, but it didn't take long before she started turning the shared lakefront into her own private resort. Heavy-duty lounge chairs, large speakers, tiki torches, and even a small pool. All of it on land that was supposed to be for everyone. I couldn't help but feel frustrated because this wasn't just a minor inconvenience. The space, which had once been a peaceful retreat for the whole neighborhood, was now completely blocked off. But the real issue started when Margaret told me this area was now exclusively hers. I thought she was joking, but then she showed me a document, a so-called easement reassignment, that claimed the HOA had given her exclusive rights to that section of the lakefront for the duration of her stay. At first, I couldn't believe it. The paper didn't even have the HOA's official seal, and no one had mentioned anything about it to the rest of the community. it became clear to me that Karen and Margaret had taken matters into their own hands, using their positions to secure privileges that were never theirs to give. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. The entire situation seemed off, and I wasn't going to let it slide. I immediately began researching the HOA's rules and my own property agreement. What I discovered was shocking. While the HOA had authority over some community rules, they had no jurisdiction over land ownership. The land my family and I had purchased was legally ours, and no one, especially Karen or Margaret, had the right to take that away. This wasn't just a matter of principle. It was about protecting what was rightfully ours. I spent hours digging into the community's bylaws, and after consulting with a lawyer, I found that I had a solid case. The next step was to act. I hired a surveyor to measure and mark the exact boundaries of the disputed property. With the official survey in hand, I went to the hardware store and ordered enough fencing to make a strong statement. I didn't need to do anything overly complicated, just something simple and effective to mark the boundaries. The whole neighborhood buzzed with rumors the moment word got out. People started asking if it was true I was building a fence, and I calmly responded, "I'm just marking property lines." The next morning, as I stood with my crew, setting up the fence, the atmosphere in the neighborhood shifted immediately. Neighbors, curious about what I was doing, started to gather around. They didn't fully understand what was happening, but the looks on their faces said it all. A mixture of surprise, concern, and a touch of excitement. I had unknowingly become the center of attention in a story that everyone wanted to know the ending to. The fence wasn't just being put up to mark property lines. It was sending a clear message. My rights had been violated, and I wasn't going to sit back and watch them get stripped away. I wanted everyone to see that sometimes you have to fight for what's yours, even when the odds are stacked against you and the powers in place are doing everything they can to stop you. As the fence slowly took shape, Margaret appeared. She stood there frozen, staring at the structure that cut across her domain. Her eyes widened in shock. It was clear she hadn't expected me to take such drastic action. Everything she had set up, the lounge chairs, the speaker system, even her small pool, was now effectively divided. Half of it belonged to her, and the other half to the community. Margaret couldn't take it. She screamed in frustration, throwing her coffee mug onto the ground, shattering it into pieces. I didn't feel bad for her. What she had done, and what Karen had allowed, was no longer just a minor inconvenience. It had turned into a full-on battle about power and fairness. Just then, Karen appeared. She was in a bathrobe, hair in curlers, clearly just out of bed. She looked like someone had shaken her awake from a deep sleep. But when she saw the fence, her anger flared instantly. She rushed to the scene, calling the police and demanding they come right away. The police arrived soon after, and after reviewing the documents I had prepared, they couldn't find any reason to make me take down the fence. Despite Karen's shouting at them, trying to force them to intervene, the officers simply reminded her that everything I had done was within my legal rights. In fact, they couldn't do anything except confirm that the fence was mine to build, and that I had every right to protect my property. But Karen wasn't going to back down that easily. She wasn't about to let me win without a fight. Karen decided to call an emergency HOA meeting to try to reverse the situation. She passed out flyers all over the neighborhood, declaring me a troublemaker, someone who was ruining the peace of the community, and that I was in violation of the community guidelines. The HOA meeting quickly turned into a full-blown showdown. My neighbors, who had quietly been observing and knew what had been going on, started to speak up. Tom Harrison, a retired judge, stood up first. He calmly laid out how Karen had violated HOA rules, listing all the legal missteps she had taken over the years. Then others joined in. Sarah Chen, whose flower garden had been bulldozed by Karen's latest project, spoke out, detailing how the HOA had mishandled everything. Each voice added more fuel to the fire, and the room grew more tense. Finally, Margaret's husband showed up. I had never met him before, but when he saw the fence and the chaos, he quickly made a decision. He turned to Margaret and said something that shocked me. He told her it was over. He wasn't going to let her continue dragging them down with this mess. Together, they began dismantling the setup Margaret had so carefully constructed. The entire neighborhood watched as the entire situation unfolded. People began to realize that sometimes, to protect what's rightfully yours, you need to stand up, even if it means going against those who hold power. It wasn't just about a fence. It was about fairness, justice, and doing what was right. By the next HOA meeting, the tide had turned. The community finally saw what had been happening behind closed doors, and my actions were recognized. Karen and Margaret's attempts to dominate the neighborhood had backfired. The community stood behind the idea that fairness mattered more than personal gain. Realizing her hold on power was slipping, attempted one last move. She tried to have the fence torn down through an executive order, but it was too late. The HOA's lawyer finally spoke up and said what everyone had been thinking. Karen had overstepped her authority. She had exposed the HOA to legal action, and it was time for her to go. The vote to remove Karen was unanimous. And as if that wasn't enough, the board voted to press charges against her for embezzling funds and illegally amending HOA documents for her own gain. 3 months later, Karen stood before a judge, charged with fraud, embezzlement, and breach of fiduciary duty. She was found guilty, sentenced to 2 years of probation, 300 hours of community service, and ordered to pay restitution to the HOA for the $47,000 she had stolen. As the judge's gavel slammed down, Karen collapsed in tears. And as for me, I still sit by the water, coffee in hand, admiring the perfectly straight fence. The lake is calm again, and peace has been restored. After Karen was removed from the HOA presidency, I felt as if a huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders. But this change wasn't just a personal victory for me. It was a victory for justice, fairness, and most importantly, for the community. My neighbors, who had silently observed everything unfold, now felt a renewed sense of freedom. They no longer had to live in fear of making a wrong move, constantly worried about unfair decisions from someone abusing their power. Since Karen's removal, I noticed a distinct shift in the atmosphere of the neighborhood. Neighbors, who had once kept to themselves, now started to open up and engage with each other more. What used to be casual hellos at the mailbox became real conversations about issues in our community. I could sense that life in Willow Creek Estates was returning to what it was supposed to be, a united community where everyone had a voice and their rights were respected. But what surprised me most was that some of the neighbors who had never spoken up before came forward to thank me for what I had done. Bill, an elderly man who lived next door, told me he had always felt suffocated by Karen's control. "Thank you for giving us a little bit of freedom," he said, his eyes filled with gratitude. That moment made me realize that this fight wasn't just about a piece of land or a fence. It was about the basic rights of every individual in the community. At the same time, I began receiving calls from various organizations and communities who had followed my story. They congratulated me for standing up against injustice and encouraged me to share my story to inspire others. I realized that I had done something more important than just protecting my property. I had sparked a change, a wake-up call in my community. However, life wasn't going to be as simple as it seemed. While Karen and Margaret were gone, the legacy they left behind was still there. The loopholes in the HOA system needed to be fixed. The rules about resident rights had to be clarified. I began attending the new HOA meetings, not to argue or confront, but to ensure that every decision made was transparent and fair. A month later, I sat in an HOA meeting with my neighbors, the first time we could truly exchange ideas openly. I felt proud when I saw people starting to speak up. No one was afraid to discuss their rights anymore. And most importantly, we no longer had to endure the oppressive control of a single person. Though my story may end here, it's not the last story. It's a lesson for all of us about rights, fairness, and the importance of standing up for what we believe in. What I've learned is that sometimes, to change everything, you don't need to fight anyone. You just need to stand firm, do what's right, and let your actions speak for themselves.